We've spoken about hydraulic fracturing or fracking many times on the show before. And what that is a process by which companies extract natural gas from the ground. And it involves drilling directly into shale rock and pumping in this cocktail of extremely dangerous chemicals to then force the natural gas to the surface. And as of today, a bunch of studies have been done on the environmental impacts, and it isn't pretty. So fracking causes tremors and earthquakes from drilling into the rocks, and then that fucks up the balance of the area. And it also causes problems with water contamination from after you drill the chemical cocktail and put it in the ground. It actually leaks into local water wells and reservoirs and things like that. But some preliminary research is also being done on the health effects. So not just the environmental effects. Now they're looking into, well, how does this affect the humans themselves? Are the babies getting sick? Or, the adults having trouble breathing, getting rashes, so on and so forth. And at least the preliminary research doesn't look good. Now, to be clear, the research has not been peer-reviewed yet. I'm going to go through a couple pieces of information here. Some of the things actually have been peer-reviewed, but other ones haven't. So here are the findings. Quote, infants born near fracking sites in Pennsylvania were more likely to have low birth weight, a sign of developmental problems. In Utah, local authorities are investigating a spate of stillbirths after tests found dangerous levels of air pollution from the oil and gas industry. So those are the findings that have not been peer-reviewed yet. I think they're in the process of getting peer-reviewed. But then there's this, quote, scientists at the Colorado School of Public Health in January published a peer-reviewed paper in the journal Environmental Health Perspectives finding an increased rate of congenital heart defects in babies born to mothers living near gas wells in Colorado. Also in Colorado, scientists found elevated levels of hormone-disrupting chemicals in groundwater samples at a town at the center of the fracking boom. Those chemicals are linked to infertility. So, should we even be surprised about this? I say of course not. I mean, we've done multiple stories of families who've had to move from their homes because their hair was falling out and they got rashes and they lost over 20 pounds, and it was all because they were near fracking sites and chemical refinery sites. There's certain places in Canada that are undergoing a similar thing. I think the Alberta region, if I'm not mistaken. And the chemicals that they use in the fracking stew are very, very dangerous. We've gone over this before on the show, but we're talking about methanol, benzene, diesel fuel, lead, rust remover, sulfuric acid, and formaldehyde. And there's also hundreds, if not thousands, of untested and unknown chemicals in the fracking fluid. There are all types of poisons and acids and corrosives and carcinogens and toxins. And the reality is, when you're pumping this stuff into the ground and it stays there, but also when the stuff is in the open air, like, just because we can't directly see what's happening with it doesn't mean there's no effect. So in other words, it's like the same idea as having gas in the air, okay? Like, it's there, but just because our eyes can't see it, it's not, just because it's not like neon green or purple or something, we go, oh, look, there it is, doesn't mean it's not affecting us. So if you have all this stuff in open air, and then there's wind factors that come into play and weather patterns, and it gets stuck in the ground and it floats around in the air, what happens when human beings breathe those things in? Very, very dangerous stuff, man. Look, the problem is we know that these things are bad for you. So even like the studies that we're conducting now, it's just a matter of finding out empirically how bad the damage is. Right? Because we already know, based on studies on the individual chemicals, that they're terrible for human beings. So it's just a matter of how bad is the damage. And look, I mean, this is a big problem, and it's not being discussed. The mainstream media is totally silent on the issue of fracking because it's creating a lot of jobs, and people just go, whatever, as long as it creates jobs. we'll shut our fucking mouth about it. And it's not even like the environmentalists or people like myself. We're not being unreasonable. Nobody's saying, ban it 100% in all cases and all those jobs, fuck them, right? All we're asking for is solid, efficient, smart regulation like we asked for in any other area. Like when there was the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008 and the Great Recession, we didn't come out here and say, ban Wall Street, ban all banks, ban, private equity firms, whatever. No, we said, wow, you should be doing efficient regulation to prevent the worst abuses. Well, it's the same thing with fracking. It's the same thing with anything. And a lot of people don't know this, but when George W. Bush and Dick Cheney were in office, you had Halliburton and other companies, they lobbied the government, and they said, look, we would like you to give us an exception to the Clean Water and Clean Air Act, specifically for fracking. And their argument was, well, it creates so many jobs, and it's this new thing, and it would just be burdensome for us to deal with the regulation. So let us have an exemption, create a loophole so that fracking is not burdened by the Clean Water and Clean Air Act. And the government said yes. And to this day, they can poison all the water they want. They can have all that stuff leak into wells and reservoirs. They can ruin the air and force people to move out of their homes because they get sick as a result of being near fracking areas. And nobody's talking about it. We got to make changes, man. We're literally poisoning ourselves because the government is that corrupt and that bought and owned by big business.